Hello, this is Dr. Eric Bricker, and thank you for watching A Healthcare Z. Today's topic is hospital governance explained. Woo, we've talked about many boring topics here on A Healthcare Z, but governance is like excruciatingly boring and excruciatingly important. So stick with me here. Now, what in the world is governance? Okay, it's the rules. Like corporations have governance, hospitals have governance. It's the rules of the organization that dictate how the organization is directed and controlled. You can think of it like the Constitution, if you will. And so as it relates to hospitals, what better place to look for information about governance for hospitals than the American Hospital Association itself? That's right, the Trade and Lobbying Association for America's Hospitals. What does the AHA itself have to say about governance? It's quite revealing. So first of all organizations, including hospitals, have to have a corporate purpose. Now, the majority of hospitals in America, as many of you know, are not for profit. They are 501c3 corporations that, per the tax code, are exempt from paying taxes. Now, in order for that to happen, their corporate purpose, drumroll please, must be charity. The corporate purpose of a not-for-profit 501c3 hospital is it is a charitable purpose. Okay, now, what is that charity? That charity is, what is the charitable endeavor of that hospital? It is, oftentimes, it is described as the health of the community. Okay, now, so all hospitals then have a board of directors. And that board itself has to be held accountable, right? So there's the CEO of the hospital, and that CEO's boss is essentially the board of directors. But the board of directors themselves are not even the grand high arbiter. They themselves have to be held accountable. Okay, so who in the world holds the board of directors accountable? It's like if you go into a hospital, you have a bad experience or whatever, you're like, okay, well, who's in charge around here? So this answers that question. Who's in charge? Is it the CEO? No. Who's in charge? Is it the board of directors? No. Ultimately, who is in charge? Okay, well, if it's a for-profit hospital, and remember, one of the largest hospital systems in America is the Hospital Corporation of America, HCA. It is a for-profit hospital. Who is the board accountable to at HCA? It is accountable to shareholders. Okay, the board of directors for for-profit hospitals are not accountable to patients. They're not accountable to employees and nurses and doctors. They are accountable to shareholders. Okay, well, fine. It could, now the shareholders in a publicly traded company, it could be that their goal is to maximize profit because they're a pension fund or they're a hedge fund or they're an insurance company or what have you. Okay, now, not-for-profit hospitals also have boards, and there's organizations that hold those not-for-profit boards accountable as well. Interestingly, the state attorney general in most states has jurisdiction over holding not-for-profit hospital boards accountable because the state attorney general is there to protect the health of the community. They are an elected official. So isn't that interesting? That, oftentimes we get enamored with like federal health policy, but when it comes to holding hospitals accountable and holding hospital boards accountable, actually the state attorney general might actually be a good place to start. Okay, next. Oftentimes, not-for-profit hospitals in America also have a religious congregation. So it might be affiliated with the Catholic Church, it might be affiliated with the Methodist Church, it might be affiliated with the Presbyterian Church, et cetera, et cetera. So there, the religious congregation. In fact, I looked at the bylaws for the Methodist hospital system here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and they are specifically accountable to the congregation of the Methodist Church. It says so in their bylaws. Okay, next up. Interestingly, the not-for-profit boards are also accountable to creditors. To the extent that the hospital has debt, then it's the creditors that can hold the hospital accountable. Okay, interestingly, not on this list. Note, patients, not on this list. Okay, next up. The board members are fiduciaries to the hospital. That means they have to ask in the hospital's best interest. And there are three main components of acting as a fiduciary in the hospital's best interest. One is the duty of care. That means that the board has to try, okay? You got to give it the old college try. What does that mean? That means that they have to be informed and they have to perform inquiry, okay? Which means they got to ask questions. They just don't sit there and blindly sign everything. They're like, well, you're giving me this information. Let me ask you some questions here. Okay, so that is duty to care. Next, there's duty of loyalty, and this is around conflicts of interest. And interestingly, the American Hospital Association actually says that there are tons of conflicts of interest on hospital boards in America. It's actually not that uncommon for a board member to be like, let's say, a supplier. They could be like the CEO of a medical glove supplier, right? I'm just making that up, right? And in that case, the CEO of the glove supplier would be like, hey, this hospital system, they should buy their medical gloves from my company. Okay, that's a conflict of interest. So in that case, that board member needs to disclose that they're the CEO of a glove manufacturing company. And then two, they need to recuse themselves from any sort of decision-making process around purchasing and contracts with glove manufacturers, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, that's duty of loyalty. You're acting in the best interest of the hospital. You're not using the hospital as a way of remunerating yourself as a board member. Okay, and then finally there's duty of obedience, meaning that the board of directors is obedient to the corporate purpose. And remember, for a not-for-profit hospital, the corporate purpose is the charity. The corporate purpose is the health of the community. Okay, now, so fine. So the board is a fiduciary to the hospital. But interestingly, even the American Hospital Association says, okay, that's fine. Then who is the hospital accountable to? And interestingly, this is a direct quote from the American Hospital Association document. I will leave a link to it in the show. It says, understanding to whom the hospital is accountable is more challenging. Okay. It's not challenging for for-profit hospitals because it's the shareholders. But the AHA admit that who the hospital is accountable to for not-for-profit hospitals is more challenging because they're like, look, it could be patients, it could be employees, it could be the doctors, it could be other folks. So isn't that interesting? That for not-for-profit hospitals, the American Hospital Association itself says that who the hospital is accountable to is unclear. Well, as a doctor, I will tell you exactly who I am accountable to, and it's very clear. It is the patients. The patient comes first always. So if you're a doctor or a nurse or any other healthcare professional, audiologist, respiratory therapist, physical therapist, occupational therapist, if you believe that you are ultimately accountable to patients and that the patient comes first, just know that the hospital as an organization does not have the same clarity that you do necessarily. Okay, now, there are some exceptions to that. There are some situations where the hospital governance, I think, is very clear to being accountable to the patients and the health of the community. I'll give you an example of that, and that is the Lee Health System in Lee County, Florida. Lee County is in Southwest Florida. It's where Fort Myers is. Now, it's a not-for-profit municipal, it is a community hospital system. It's not accountable to a religious organization. It's not for profit. It has a board of directors that is elected by the citizens of Lee County, Florida itself. So the community, which the hospital is responsible for their health of, is voting for the board of directors to act as their proxy. Okay, that kind of makes sense. I would argue that the Lee Health System has actually a very clear and strong governance structure for their hospital. It's very clear who they're accountable for, the people in Lee County. Okay, let me give you a concrete result of such clear governance. What has Fort Myers, Florida been getting a lot of in the past few years? Hurricanes. And the Lee Hospital System is a well-oiled machine when it comes to hurricane preparation and weathering the storm, literally, and keeping the lights on and keeping the doors open through the hurricane and keeping all of their operations, or getting all their operations back up and running as fast as humanly possible after the hurricane passes. I mean, they've got Hurricane A team and Hurricane B team. They've got people who, like, literally, they and their families will stay overnight at the hospital if they're part of the Hurricane A team. They have spent all this money on redundancies. They've got an IT office that's not at the hospital, because they have it separated off intentionally so that they have redundancy, so that that the technology is not going to go down. Okay, they've spent lots of time and energy and money to keep that hospital up and running. Guess what? If there was a hurricane and the hospital didn't work and it shut down exactly when the community needed them to be there and to be open, guess what would happen to those board members? Whoosh, they would be out, because the people of Lee County would vote them out, because they're going to hold them accountable for not being prepared for a hurricane. So now that works for Lee County, that works for Lee Health, that might not work in your particular area, but it's very important to understand that hospital governance, one, for for-profit hospital, is not to patients, it is to shareholders. Two, for not-for-profit hospital, who they are ultimately accountable is unclear as per the AHA. It is confusing, and it oftentimes includes the creditors, the holders of the hospital debt, as well. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. It's an incredibly boring and an incredibly important topic, so thank you for watching A Healthcare Z.